This video is a part 2 to the video I did on the complete opening of the chakras and the Hindu enlightenment. Well, I've just recently, a few weeks ago, probably just 3 weeks ago, a little less, came upon another state, and it's actually an important part of the Hindu enlightenment that I had even completely forgotten about. And in some ways, well, I wouldn't say it was the most important, because there's other parts that I'll mention real quick. All right, so now what I want to do first is real quick go through what I did in the previous video. I'm going to do it in just like less than 5 minutes, I hope, just so that you know that we're not starting off here and how much has come before this. Because I'm now 70 years old, and my first kundalini symptoms were probably in my early teens, like 14 maybe 15. And so I'll start there, and let's see, I think it's even a little before that. Well, 14, kundalini, 14. And of this I had spiritual experiences before that when I was a child, and but I don't want to get into all that. I'm trying to make this brief. So just the kundalini, and trying to leave out the experiences to some degree. At least I did in the last video. This one I'm going to have to talk a little bit more about the experience. Okay, so so the kundalini, first of all, when I was like 14, and actually, yeah, there was some pain in my left leg. Someone mentioned specifically that the left leg is a pain, is associated with the kundalini, saying that it doesn't even start at the it's not really necessarily at the base of the spine, but in the ground. I didn't think that was true at all until I remembered I did have a unique pain in my left leg. So now that's not very big. Some people have a lot of physical symptoms, and I think that's just a lot depends on your biology. Everyone's going to talk about being unprepared if you have difficult symptoms. I don't think it has much to do with being unprepared. You can't really prepare for this. Well, you can start to meet your suffering, but even then, you don't know how much you're going to go through. All right, so anyhow, I did have one thing with the, actually one experience with the kundalini, because the first chakra is sex, and power, and there's other things like this, and in the very first chakra. And I did have one experience of that when I was probably 14, and distinctly the kundalini, and because it affected the entire body. And so anyhow, and so those symptoms when I was very young, and then probably when I was but I did some meditation and would, often come upon the transcendent, because I would do it outdoors, and I from early childhood experiences, I was aware that there was something transcendent to nature standing behind it. So I would always meditate outdoors, and with that sense of that transcendent there, looking very subtly and closely at nature, and then I'd watch my thoughts and feelings very subtly. That combination going back and forth, I found very valuable, and so that's the type of meditation I would recommend, going out in nature. Look within and look without, someplace where you're alone. And I would do it up in the hills where I was very much alone. And so anyhow, oh my goodness, I'm taking too long already, because this is mostly covered in that first video, and that's important because so much went on. You see, between the ages of early teens and 70, and my whole life has been dedicated to this spirituality, so I've been through a lot, and I know a lot about the chakras and kundalini from experience. So what I'm saying, it doesn't come from books, it's all my personal experience of it. So let's see, so there's extraordinary experiences. I had one really extraordinary experiences when I was 20, and then aware of the transcendent in nature, and then I think maybe about 25 or something, the kundalini came up with all of its power, straight into consciousness, and caused a part of what I call the dark night of the soul. The dark night of the soul has two parts: the dark night of the senses and the dark night of the spirit. Almost everyone's only talking about the dark night of the senses, and I'll describe the other. I describe everything in the other video, so I want to keep this short. So anyhow, a lot of suffering. In fact, it was so strong. You see, what's happening is that kundalini is coming straight up through the subconscious into the conscious, but it doesn't necessarily drag subconscious content with it. And I didn't have particularly traumas in my life, so I didn't have any psychological stuff coming up at all. So some people, when the kundalini is coming up, they spend a lot of time, excuse me, because there is that trauma in the subconscious, and that almost has to be faced and cleared out before they can, well, the whole thing's about clearing out is clearing out the psychological content and uniting the will as the energies of consciousness are going to become united, liberated and united. All right, so there was, I had a couple periods of the dark night of the spirit, and dark night of the soul, dark night of the senses, where there's a lot of suffering. And it's not so much, at least this part of it, once you've dealt with most of the psychological things, then the next part is just the fact that the will is that this energy is uncontrolled, and uncontrolled impact on your consciousness. And so it's something you cannot deal with, no matter how many insights you've had, because it's not caused from the psychological content, or not caused from the thoughts, not caused from the feelings, not caused from anything in the past. What I'm describing here as this part of the dark night, a latter part of the dark night, is caused because of this uncontrolled release of the energy straight into consciousness, where you have no control of it. And so that produces so it's not an existential anxiety that's coming up, but it produces an existential sense of this total vulnerability. All right, so there was that, I think in my mid-20s, and then when that was over, let's see, my father died shortly after that, a year or two later, and there was a lot of suffering, but it came out very cleanly. When that was over, then started the aridities, where it's like a void of all previous experience. What it was is, this is where the transformation is taking place, transformation of consciousness, and the where I have to stop eating so many nuts, it makes me a little allergic. It's bothering my throat a tiny bit. And let's see. Well, this is where a lot of transformation is taking place. Of course, the very fact that this kundalini is coming up is a transformation. You're already opening up. So there is something transforming. There is something biological, events happening, where there's a change taking place, allowing this energy to come up. And so people are always a lot of people I see online are trying to pursue the opening of this kundalini, and I don't know what methods they're using. It strikes me it's a little odd, because I never did those. All you want to do is do whatever you find moving spiritually, but it has to have a lot of sit silently. That's just crucial for meditation. You can't avoid that. Sit silently and alone, and out in nature is nice, and that was what I did. All right, so then during this, this is the essence St. John of the Cross's second part, the dark night of the spirit. That in that you lose all of that previous content you had with what was transcendent, with God or whatever. And that's what it is. It's not psychological suffering. It's not because someone died. Although I've known, although for Krishnamurti, he pegs it because of his brother's death. He said that the intensity of the suffering there, he said perhaps the intensity of the suffering there allowed for the transformation to take place. But this transformation doesn't require anything to happen. In fact, Bernadette Roberts, who I mentioned it in the previous one, she wrote The Experience of No Self, The Path to No Self, and other books. And I spent like 25 years with her, going to a couple dozen retreats. I highly recommend her. And so you're going to lose all that contact, and that is an enormous loss because of how much, now when people just say they've gone to bliss, they've had bliss, I've never talked like that. It's always what you see, how extraordinary. When you're looking at God or this source of creation, it's so extraordinary. You're not going to come out of it saying, oh, I was in bliss. That's so trivial, the state you're in, compared to what you're seeing. I don't think they're seeing it when they come out and talk about bliss. There's a bit of a revelation that takes place when you start to see this transcendent. And that's what you're shooting for. That's so much more significant than bliss. Oh, bliss is important because what it shows is that you are coming upon what you think and feel is going into submission. It's becoming quiet in the face of something extraordinary. And your mind is pointed toward that extraordinary. That's why you're having this bliss. So that's fantastic development if you're having bliss. And of course, bliss really talks more about the silence, that the whole of the mind coming still. And then there could be, the bliss, I don't know what they're experiencing, but of course you're in an extraordinary state, And it's more closer to joy and more closer to a suspension of consciousness than an experience within consciousness, Bliss is more of a suspension, which will become more clear as it develops. Okay, let's see, I've got to go through that. This is, my previous videos, he was over an hour and a half, so if this, recounting it, it looks like over 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. Hopefully I'm almost through. So anyhow, there's biological taking place as to why you're no longer seeing that transcendent. And because my emphasis on what the ego is are actually these capacities because of the way the energies of consciousness flow through consciousness. And that's the main point of my videos, is to talk about what the actual ego is, because it is not a question of identity, which is so superficial. I mean, it's not, you will see yourself as something different when it's over, but you may not even see that. So identity is such a superficial thing that they're pointing at. Now, these great Hindu mystics have come to something extraordinary, but when they start talking about identity, it leads people astray, because you can, identify with this awareness in which there is no self, which sees the self, if you still believe there is a self, or sees that all the phenomena in consciousness, that you are not that. See, people, Neo-Advaita, they're just developing this perspective, and their suffering goes right on, and all their problems go right on. So that's no enlightenment at all. They call it awakening. It's an awakening of to a certain fact, perhaps, if it's combined with, some perception of the transcendent, besides just identifying with the awareness. All right, so you have to face all your suffering if you really get transformed. I mean, open up to all And there's no insight necessary. As Krishnamurti, the whole thing about insight, it's not insight, it's about opening every dimension of consciousness to that transcendent. And it all opens through silence to that transcendent. And so anyhow, so you are being transformed then during this aridities, the Catholics call it aridities, and to this loss of all contact with God. Now, anytime, you have a terrible time in life, you're going to, feel like God's absent because you're suffering. That's not it. That's not this particular thing. And of course, there are periods of depressions, and sorrow. I had that in my mid and late teens. I had a little of that, and that was, really awful. And mine would only come and go in the evenings for an hour or something. And so there is initially you do have all that, all the sorrow that comes inevitably from life and our consciousness. And so you have to face all of that. All right, so then when I was in my very early 30s, the kundalini started up again. I felt like a steel rod in my back, and then a cloud came down over me. Again, shut down. That resulted in the liberation of the prana, and your sense of life, and came out of the senses and the intellect, and into peace and being, eventually. And then the chakras started opening up, more fully. And now remember, in the very beginning, you're going to have your chakras open up. When you're 20 or earlier, in the beginning of the kundalini, you have these extraordinary experiences when the kundalini passes through the chakras or opens up the heart chakra, some people. So just because you have these upper chakras going on doesn't mean that that's not enlightenment yet. That's God showing you what could come about later, what can be your permanent state in the future. And if you've got to face your suffering, and you have to keep meditating, and you can't be running around saying you're enlightened. That will feed your ego. And you're not really ready to talk about things at that point. Well, you can inspire some people. So anyhow, but be careful about that. And then let's see. Okay, so, oh yes, the chakras start opening up. And then the liberation of the prana, and that energy pulls out and then starts to rest in the chakras. And then you start opening up out of the chakras, not just being aware of them, not just having these, extraordinary experience. And that's then I had heard, you can't read the Kundalini without, and I've only read, like, if you put everything together that I've read, it'd be less than 5 pages. I'm telling you the truth. Everything I've read about the Kundalini and the chakras could fit on 5 pages. And but they talk about that there's a path straight up, and then there's talk about 2 paths, where it's not straight, and the one where it goes straight up is associated with enlightenment. Now, I always felt it coming straight up. So if you feel it's coming straight up and out here or out here, or opening up this or that, that's not the final enlightenment. It's so when they talk about coming straight up, I thought, well, it's always coming straight up, and it always feels unimpeded. That's the nature of the Kundalini. It's just going to shoot up, and at some point, and at an early point in the beginning, then but I read something about it, and it said going straight up, and I thought, what's that? So I looked and down, and then it's funny how you look for that and you find it, but I didn't find what they were talking about. Something else happened when I looked down, and that is it started coming up the front of me, and it's, I think, more associated with the prana than the Kundalini, because this is the prana really that resides in these chakras, your sense of life, and you feel you're living out of your chakras, not up here looking at your chakras, you know, where you're aware of your chakras, you're feeling what's going on there. That's different than when they open. When they open, you're living out of them. In fact, I felt like I was living out of my belly button. My head was up here for a while. I mean, absolutely literally. Of course, my vision was coming up through my eyeballs, but the entire experience was down here in my belly, and I was living down there out of that for a little while. Just I don't know, a day or two or three, I don't remember. And but that's charming and surprising. So then these, and of course you have to face all your suffering if you want to open up these chakras. Each time a new chakra opens up, you're going to have some sort of suffering possibly about it. And then you start to see the transcendent out of these, you know, out of the belly button. It's a feeling sense, you know, because that's your feeling chakra down there near the belly button, I think just an inch below, they say. And I experienced an inch below. In fact, I had this vision because I sunk so deeply down in there once that I was looking up at my belly button. This huge belly button. I was sitting in this boat on this water in my belly. You know, this kind of vision thing. I've had so few, like 2 or 3 visions my whole life. That was one of them. And there was this big belly button. I was inside my stomach. But you know, it's half-based because your experience is down there. You know, and then you'll have these funny visions. And I've only had a couple, you know, 2 or 3 or more. So anyhow, so then you're living out of these chakras. And then you see when it started coming up here. So at first it might come through your top chakra and have experience relative to that. You know, absolutely extraordinary experiences, you know. And, but that's not it. That's absolutely wonderful because you've solidly begun. And, but don't start talking about everything. The trouble is people have these experiences, then everything any Hindu master, guru ever said, you're going to feel like you're in that place. And you're going to start talking about it. I've seen this over and over again. And saying the things they're saying, but you're not sitting where they're sitting. Where they're saying it is in a transformed consciousness you haven't come upon yet. So now sometimes the words they use can fit right down from the beginning. You know, what you're identified with before any transformation, you can identify with that awareness. And then you can, so what you identify with can change. See, that's the words they use. Terrible thing to point at. It's because it's so much more than that. And that just leads people off. So anyhow, yes, you can, you know, say I'm not the body, I'm what is aware of the body. You know, you can do these things before the transformation. And so those words kind of fit, you know, so it's not that bad using it. But be careful of quoting too much from the Hindu things, because otherwise you lose what the Hindus have truly come upon. And you can misguide people because of that. All right, so now we've got all the chakras. So that is that progressive order, you know, where lower one opens, then higher and higher. And I'm talking about a period of 20 years, probably, of this sequential development, you know. And then the throne one took me a long time. And then eventually, when this opens up, direct vision of God, you see God directly. God has no form, so you're not going to see anything. So it's an incredible disclosure of the fact that you're seeing God. And then the crown chakra opens up. It balances all the others. And some people say it's all it is. And but that's not. It actually is a chakra in itself, because you're going to have unique experiences just like these chakras did. It is going to balance them. In fact, it's going to force them open, I've found, and which can be a little unsettling. And then you know, there's a couple things. One is witness consciousness, and the other is, and I'm not sure which of these chakras really related to, is once they're all open, all of your chakras at once, open, and you're living out of all of them, there's a global experience. And then it includes vision, you know, this chakra or just your eyeballs, so that everything you see is united with everything within. So everything is equally intimate. The world is this one being consciousness bliss. When this thing opens up, you see, and they're harmonized, and so the whole world is seen as one being, your being, you know, and in time, you'll be aware of God, and your awareness of consciousness, which is the ultimate self, not any idea within consciousness. The fact of consciousness is what you should be calling self. That's what they're pointing at, true self, not the images, not the thoughts, not the feelings. Anyhow, and it will be imperceptible of the divine. I don't like saying what the Hindus are, that you have God consciousness. Well, you're open to that. See, I prefer the Christians, the Catholics saying, you're one with that. Your consciousness and that consciousness are one, a union. And their emphasis on their true self, their unitive state, is that it's a union of will primarily, whereas the Hindus talk about a union of consciousness, your knowing dimension. So there's knowing dimension in your will, and it's important to be aware of the will prior to its binding with thought and the creation of desire. See, the Hindus mention desire a lot, but it's to understand the transformations that are taking place, you have to understand the energy behind the will, behind the will, because this isn't your conscious control of your will. This will be the energies behind the will, and because that too, like the prana, is liberated from your conscious layer. And that, I've talked about that so much in my other videos, I'm not going to talk about it here, but that's the most important point I really have to say. It's in the other videos, but I want to do this on the chakras and the Hindu enlightenment. Okay, so that's where I was at. That's what I talked about in my previous video. This coming upon being consciousness bliss, and the opening of this crown chakra. Now, I was also aware of some of the things when I made that video, and I neglected to talk about it. But at that time, I was aware of an energy body, and especially behind me, just something behind me, this big, felt like a big body behind me. I won't say it's a person because I know it was my consciousness. And so many people, you start talking about things that are experienced outside of you, will start talking about they're aliens or something, which I have never had any experience of and have a serious doubt about. And they never have anything good they have nothing profound to say, They just repeat what people already know, and they think, oh, it's coming from this extraordinary source. And the extraordinary source has nothing good to say. It's already out there in all the, all the other Hindu stuff and whatever New Age is coming up with. So ignore those if you think there's aliens. They have nothing to say. And but anyhow, so there was this energy body hanging over me. And then there was something, and of course the witness consciousness is coming from here, but I didn't have much, I only had that briefly when this first opened up. And this first opened up when I faced a lot of suffering. Spent 2 or 3 days sitting in my bed facing something. And for at least 2 days, facing something, facing something, facing something, facing something. All the suffering. And that's it. You want to open up your chakras? That's how you do it. You open up to your human life and all of its vulnerability. And there's no bypassing that with insight. Insight is not fundamentally the transforming agent, as Krishnamurti would say. It's the openness. And so he's just opening up this and having insights. Insights are trivial. It's not an insight. It's the complete opening of the human being. Every dimension of consciousness, every dimension of your relationship with the sacred, and it's transforming you as a human being as you do it. So the absolute, can you talk about that? Maybe not. It's transcendent. What are you going to say? And it's not manifest. So there's very little you can say about that. So, but there's a whole lot you can say about what a human being is and how that human being is going to transform. Oh, and I didn't even mention that I think it actually started slightly prior to that cloud coming down, is the ending of all suffering. And not, what it is that when these, all your chakras open up, your consciousness is resting on that deeper element. And so that any strong experiences, and your suffering is strong, will take you in, will open you up. By depths, I mean your full opening, not a psychological depth, but a full opening, an opening into the body. So, this depth, and that your depths go into peace. Not your surface life, which can still be hard and difficult, but anything, all suffering brings you into that depth, so that and the more you do it, the more you face, the more rapidly everything moves into that being, consciousness, bliss. You see, being is something that never rose through the senses or the intellect. That whole lower dimension, no thought or feeling gets in there. There's no deception taking place there. People think, oh, you're projecting this or that. With your thoughts and feelings, you're imagining these things. What's this true being? And it's not what people are calling being, because they're talking about being present, which is so important. But I'm talking about a different experience. They don't call it being consciousness bliss because you're being present. It's because there's this deeper dimension to consciousness. And it's a feeling sense, but not something that came in through the senses of the intellect, the sense of being. And of course, then there's the bliss, the silence, and the suspension of consciousness, this awareness of the transcendent, which is, it's your openness to that. So you're in so there was already this marvelous state where you're free of suffering, any deep suffering, and even the small suffering, if you fully face it, it goes into this, and mostly into peace, and sometimes into bliss. Every time I go for a walk, I go into bliss. And for a long time, this partial suspension of consciousness, and where there's, sometimes no sense of anyone there at all, and just the scenery, and sometimes you're aware of your consciousness, and there's almost no thought at all. And but anyhow, all right. So then there was something way above my head, and I knew it was. And first, I thought it was so transcendent, and it was in a sense, and it seemed to be have awareness. But I know it's part of my consciousness, and it's aware, and I'm not even aware. See, I'm out of here, and it's up out of there, and I don't even know what it's experiencing. Bizarre. It just sounds. It's as intellectually, it's as bizarre to me as it sounds to you. And anyhow, but so recently this thing came down, and now that so strange, and but it came down right next to my head. And I had known at some point, I don't remember if it was up there or down here, where I realized that this thing is probably my future, distant future, I thought, but apparently it wasn't distant at all. It came quite rapidly. But I found I can go back to this witness consciousness has no personal element to it at all. Just silent awareness with no human reaction. I mean, I didn't like it. And I didn't want to go there. But I told God, well, if that's my fate, okay. And but nice thing is they became one. I didn't see this coming together, but at a point I knew. And that thing beside me was gone, and there was just one, and it had the elements of both. So that was good. Okay, and then just a little while, probably a few days, the kundalini erupted again, and this time I could clearly see it was what these Hindus were talking about, this straight path, even though it always seemed straight. But I glanced down and it was like a hollow tube coming straight up into consciousness, and the energy is just flowing up. And so, and I'm going to use this analogy because it just popped in my mind. I remember seeing this charity would raise money by selling these little plastic ducks, intentionally cheap little plastic ducks that would float on the water, you see. So they would sell them, and then they would throw them by the thousands into this small river. And whoever sailed down in 1 or 2 miles at the finish, whoever got there first, whoever's duck made it first, because they all had numbers on them. Whoever won would win some prize. You know, that's how they would raise money. And it was so these little plastic ducks, you could see them bobbing up and down in the stream, you know. And my consciousness was just like that. I like that example because my consciousness was so small. It's like, you know, the human consciousness, what was left of it, you know, was just this tiny duck. And it was like, because there's this huge fountain of energy. So I was literally up here, you know, and it was bouncing around. Like this little tiny, this consciousness. And it was a little like, oh my God. You know, I mean, you're literally this big fountain underneath and you have no control. You see, it was the last ending of personal control and the last ending of the ego, of egoic control. There are other dimensions of the ego that still have to be, gee, I never shaved, that still have to be ended. And, but the functioning, what's left is just the conditioning, which turns out to be, you know, which you have to clear up all of your conditioning and live, you know, life right. And so there's, because the ego has the essence of the ego is so much deeper than your psychological conditioning. You see, it's this entire structure I'm talking about that's being transformed. That whole setup of that structure, the way the energies are flowing through the brain. And the two primary ones that are transformed are the will, and which gives you that personal control, that sense of me controlling. And even when you meditate, you may feel like it's choiceless. It's because that ego is choicelessly choosing it, you know, without, you know, making a choice between two things. It honestly wants this, it's sincere, and it wants to be aware. That's still this energy of will, and that hasn't yet been liberated. So the will gets liberated, and the prana, so that your thought and feeling is no longer what you're living out of. You're living out of this peace and being. You're living out of your chakras and the depth of consciousness, and so you have that. So that's your sense of life. Is no longer much in thought and feeling. Thought and feeling is kind of superficial. And that's where they're getting this thing of identity. You know, they're seeing this. Saying, I'm not identified. But that's, anyhow. Well, they probably don't have too many words to choose, you know. Too many ways to describe it. So anyhow, okay, so there's that liberation of that kundalini going straight at the sushumna. I think it's written something like that. I don't know if I've ever heard it spoken. I've just seen it, and then right after that, something interesting happened. That is that now I'd heard the word bodily form before, and you know, it's in the Buddhist thing, and one of the skandhas. And what happened next is that this energy shot out of me, And right after the Sushumna thing, you know, up the that energy shot out of me into the room and out into the hallway. And out, when it went out into the hallway, it triggered the motion detector there, which turned on some lights. Now, this wasn't an electromagnetic energy. It wasn't light waves, because that would have been instantaneous. And this moved extremely fast, just shot out, but it didn't go at the speed of light. See, what it turned out to be is that I didn't notice it till an hour or two later quite what had happened. You look down your body, and there's no body. It's a bodily form is what they call it. It's the liberation of bodily form. Now, Bernard Roberts talks about a further transformation of bodily form is eliminated. And but this is the liberation of bodily form. So there's this bodily energy. That's this energy body. And you are that whole room. You're every time, and when I'm in a room, I'm aware of it. The whole room is my body, but it's like it's in the air. There's this thing, you know. So you see, it's interesting that it's the liberation of bodily energy, and it would be something physical like that. Something has to. How does something move across and to trigger a motion detector? You know, that it's related to bodily form and something almost physical. Something moved through the, you know, it flew out of me, flew into the room and out the door into the hallway, and I suppose the rest of the apartment, and triggered that motion detector. See, so it wasn't light, and it wasn't energy that would cause the lights to flicker. It didn't turn the light bulb on directly. It turned the motion detector. See, I think that's just interesting, because to me, it's just totally new. I never thought of having a bodily form. Now, my sensations are floating in space, you know, no sense of a body. And if I look down from my body, it's immediately the entire room. And now this energy was liberated, just like the prana is liberated and still is somewhat in thought and feeling, you know, but it's no longer bonded. And so you're not living out of thought and thought and feeling becomes, so you can so easily face it, you know, any suffering, and it goes into peace and bliss, because it's not dangerous anymore. You're not living out of it. You don't feel you're living out of it. You have no fear of anything psychological back in, you know, 30 years ago, 40 years ago when that happened. And for the rest of your life, you have no fear of suffering. And of physical pain, sure, when people have physical pains as they get older, I wouldn't want to be in physical pain. And so anyhow, I'm not including that. I don't know what would happen if I felt that. And if I could really say any liberation from that, I don't know. I'd have to wait till, hopefully it won't happen. Hopefully I won't find out. So anyhow, this bodily form thing was just kind of interesting to me, because it's so unexpected. And but like I said, it's liberated, it's not gone. So there is some sense now, a bit of a sense of the body, but it includes the entire room now. And except when I go outdoors, and I don't know what happens to when I go outdoors. Of course, when you go outdoors, it might be a slightly different part of your consciousness that's awake, that's looking around. Maybe this bodily energy doesn't want to bump into other people. I live alone, you see. And that might be it. And so anyhow, all right. Then none of this is the important thing yet. The important thing, I didn't notice till 2 days later. And it's hard to even say I noticed it. If I hadn't been given a pre-glimpse, 15 years earlier, I never would have, I wouldn't know what to think of this. But I think that's why sometimes you get preliminary glimpses, because these, like this, like I say in the beginning, you can have these extraordinary experiences, so that when these experiences are no longer extraordinary, but your daily life that are taken for granted, you can say, it is related to that earlier experience, but now it's not extraordinary. And I think that might be one reason God gives you those extraordinary experiences, not only just to encourage you and to show you something, and but so that later, when it becomes, and to let you know, you can have this permanently, and to let you know that when you're in the permanent state, you'll know it was that, even when it's no longer extraordinary. And so anyhow, now what I had about 15 years ago, when I first had this important development, is that I was teaching at a college, and I was a math teacher, and I was walking out to my car across the parking lot, and suddenly I saw that every dimension of myself as a human being, everything you could ever want, everything you could ever long for, to love and to be loved, everything you long for was, it didn't move me then. It moves me. These things move you when I talk about it, but not when you experience it. You don't get moved like this. You can't have extraordinary experiences when you're being moved emotionally. And anyhow, so every dimension of myself as a human being was fulfilled at that moment, and remained fulfilled for, I think, a day or more, a couple of days, slowly faded away. I thought it might be permanent. So without any experience, this is the funny thing about it. It seems so contradictory, so impossible, that you are going to have the fulfillment of every dimension of yourself as a human being and hardly even notice it. I hardly noticed it. And yet I knew, absolutely, it was that. And now I understand it when it's happened again. And what it is that all these things you desired, and this is, you see, this is what these great Hindu mystics are saying. Like Ramana Maharshi, he says, what really causes happiness is self, consciousness. Not this idea of a self that people are saying is an illusion. Consciousness. These people who are saying there's no self, it's because they're only looking at thought and feeling, your thoughts, your idea of a self. But once you go past that, then you realize that consciousness itself is what is self. And that's when you have God consciousness, you think God's and self is the same, you see. So you were never seeking what you thought you were. You were always seeking what you get experienced by way of that thing. And you may not even know the depth of what you're really looking for. And when you find someone, you really like, is it them you like, or is it how they make you feel? You see, that's going one step deeper. It's how you feel when you're with them. And even how you feel, see, there's something below that, peace. Even exciting things. You go to a rock concert and you escape from all of your worries, and all of everything, all the things you've got to be doing, all this, all the things happening in your life, and you go there, and it's just a joy. And of course, the music's something in and of itself too, and there's the beauty in the music, but there's something deeper you're getting by way of that. And so what it is, you see, everything happens at the depths. And that's why this salvation from suffering actually is from the depths. Not that you can't be bothered by every little thing that happens. Unless they push you into your depth or you fully open up. You can fully up to a little thing and it'll go, of course, immediately into peace. If you decide to sit there and meditate and look at, and I do that still, I have to sit there with that feeling and opening up to it. And I can no longer watch my thought and feeling. That's one of the things that goes down. Went down over 30 years ago. Can't watch my thoughts and feelings. But I can sit there with them and be open to it. See, that's a part of what the ego is this ability to meditate, and which I explain in my other videos. All right, so there is this, so you see the peace is at your depth, and that's where you would want it, because it's your depths you're afraid of. That's why you won't meditate. If the feelings take you, you're afraid of the depth of your feelings, your insecurity, your vulnerability, that life is intrinsically dangerous. See, everything the existentialists are pointing at, which shows they're probably wrestling with this dark night of the soul, is that, this dread, all these things. Existentialists are great at choosing words to describe it. I did read a book on existentialism. What was that called? Anyhow, I forget. Let's see, what was my point about that? Oh yes, that's why you're afraid of your depths. You're afraid of the depth of feeling, and you're afraid you could be trapped in that, because you're bonded to thought and feeling, your prana, your life energy. The prana, what's extraordinary, see, the kundalini is felt exterior. The prana is your living life, what you're living out of, your very life. Not some feeling of life, well, it may be in a sense, but the life you're living out of, this enormous, intimacy, period. Prana is intimacy. And you're living out of thought and feeling. That prana gets liberated from that. And so you have this intimacy through your chakras, this intimacy and this openness. And the feelings can come even more because you have no fear of them. You're being liberated from your feelings, but then your feelings can be even this beautiful display of feeling. And but your intimacy and depth is below that. So that happened 40 years ago. After the cloud, that's our experience. So it's what you are actually every dimension that a human being seeks for its fulfillment is seeking. You get all of that, everything. And now, just like suffering is at your depths, and you can still have things at the surface. So you can still have some desires at the surface. You might like vanilla more than chocolate. And you might like take a walk somewhere beautiful. That's not going to go away. I won't say it never does, but for goodness sakes. Who wouldn't want to take a walk someplace beautiful? Eat food you like, And so, when, it's a liberation from desire. There is a true liberation, this complete fulfillment in the depths, and this liberation so that you're not controlled by it. Just like you're not living out of the prana, it's not bonded, so desire is no longer has that control over you. You still have to make choices sometimes. And I knew when I came upon this beautiful state, I thought, God's not going to leave me in this beautiful state. You just sit there and ripen till you rot. God keeps pushing us, because there is something further. So I'm saying this is complete enlightenment, complete Hindu enlightenment. But there's further to go. It does keep going. And Bernadette Robertson, her books, The Experience of No Self, The Path to No Self, and What is Self, she has an important section in there. She'll talk about the further path that goes on after this. And but you've reached a certain point. You don't deeply suffer. It's a liberation and a freedom from suffering. And because you can turn and watch it at ease. No fear of it. See, it's an ending of fear, really. And so there's this peace, this opening to the transcendent. You're aware of that, and all the time.